Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
It is going great. In fact, it is the greatest of all time. And that's perfect, because guess what we're going to talk about today? The greatest of players of all time at Ohio State.
Tremendous segue, and out of nowhere. Pretty good job, Tom.
Speaking of transitions.
So, this is the defensive version of Tuesday's look at the greatest of all time on the offensive side of the ball for the Buckeyes, where we pretty much agreed on everybody because it's easier. You know what? In this era of disagreement, Tom and I are just going to agree on stuff. That's everything now we're just going to agree with. Is that right, Tom?
No, jerk.
That's fine. Oh, now, okay. All right, we can go there. We can get personal now. That makes for a better show, more entertaining. I am freer to say what I actually feel, which is great because my name is on this podcast too, and I shouldn't have to hide my feelings, and I shouldn't have to just, when we record, it's fine, and then when we're done, I just go rant and rave to my wife about the misery that I'm dealing with on this show. So yeah, we can put it out there for everybody. I got no problem with that, Tom.
You are not going to believe who this jerk picked as his best tight end of all time. I cannot believe I have been subjected to this garbage.
He didn't think Fred Puggich was the best tight end of all time. Fred Puggich led the team in receiving and yards and in 1 year, 9 catches, and he doesn't. Wes Fessler, who? Give me a break.
Yeah, of all the Ohio State tight ends interviewed to potentially replace John Cooper, he is definitely one of the best.
The hill we will die on. Fred Puggich versus Wes Fessler as Ohio State's greatest tight end of all time, because this is TEU.
Mm-hmm. Every year, the year of the tight end.
Every year, it's the year of the tight end, as Tom eloquently said, and then I exactly repeated what he said. So now we are going to move to the defensive side of the ball, where, Tom, there's been quite a few All-Americans and some great players and some award winners. No Heisman winners, per se. But that's okay. That's not entirely true. I mean, Hopalong did win a Heisman. He also played defense. So there is that. But Tom, let's start where it all starts, up front. And let's start with defensive end, and we'll go with bookends because it's just easier that way. And maybe we think of the one greatest of all time, and we have had this discussion over the last year because of what Chase Young has done. And when you watch him in real time, and I'll just say I'm going with Chase Young because I did it at the time. And I did the same thing with Nick Bosa at the time, and I did the same thing with Joey Bosa at the time, where they were all, in my opinion, the best defensive ends in Ohio State history. But Nick Bosa was... what he was doing in 2018 before he got hurt was pretty insane. And I judge him based on what I saw in those first initial games that year, and also what he did as a freshman in 2017. But then Chase Young last year, I think, took it all to a different level. And for me, he is the answer here, which, for one, it's kind of uncomfortable to say because there's that's total recency bias, and that there may be some of that, but it also doesn't discount the fact that he missed 2 games and still set the school record for sacks, was an All-American, won all kinds of awards, and was really stinking dominant on the field. So yeah, it might be recent, but I don't know that I've ever seen anybody better than him at defensive end for the Buckeyes.
To me, he was the first person I put down at defensive end. Like, there's a bunch of really good players, but Chase Young's the first name I wrote down. And, I know people will think it is recency bias, but you go through the rest of the team, I don't think I mentioned anyone or listed anyone who had played in the last 14 or 15 years on offense. So we're not exactly slaves to the past decade of Ohio State football here. True. So, yeah, he was as dominant a player as I've seen on the defensive side of the ball at Ohio State ever. And even when he was not producing, he was creating so many opportunities for everyone else in that defense because he took entire chunks of the field away. It was just like, well, we're not going to do this because Chase Young's going to be there, and we're not going to, he took certain plays away from the opposing teams. He tied up multiple blockers on a lot of plays, and those are the games where he didn't get on the score, on the stat sheet very much. 4 sacks in a game against Wisconsin. I mean, like that was just an absurd season, and you add in the 2 additional games, what he could have done in those games if he hadn't had that suspension for the NCAA thing. I mean, the numbers he could have ended up with, he very easily could have ended up with 20 sacks if he had played the full season last year. Like that's well within range. So yeah, I think Chase Young's almost a no-brainer at one of those spots.
And he didn't even have any sacks, I believe, in the last 3 games. Because or the last 2 games, because there's so much attention paid to him, but he was still an impact player because you watch the clips of the Fiesta Bowl, and like he is getting in Trevor Lawrence's face, and Lawrence is getting rid of the ball just in time, but he's having to rush those throws, and Young is still impacting the game, and yeah, it went the final 3 games without a sack, so that's 5 games, the 2 that he missed, and then the final 3. And he still produced like that and was still productive in those final 3 games, and it was impactful. And I chuckle when people try to discount what he did in those games because just watch him and see the trouble that he gives them. So that he is number 1 for me. Nick Bosa, I think, is number 2, and he was an improvement upon his brother. And Joey Bosa was awesome. His junior year, his numbers dropped, and you can say that he was double teamed in all of this. I still think there was a little bit of that entire team kind of lost the hunger. The eyes were no longer on the prize. But Joey Bosa started, I believe, 10 games as a true freshman. Adolphus Washington realized that, now I have to become a defensive tackle because I'm not going to play in front of that guy. But for me, the number 2, and you can still go back to Mike Vrabel, Matt Finkus, those guys, because they were the guys before this newest crop of Larry Johnson monsters, but I'll go with Nick Bosa as the bookend.
If Nick Bosa had had a full second season, I think I probably would have gone with him as well, that full junior season. But it's real hard to not pick Mike Vrabel. I'm just going to read through the tackles for the Ohio State record book, okay? Current leader for tackles for loss in a season, Mike Vrabel. Current leader for tackles for loss career, Mike Vrabel. Current leader for tackles for lost yardage in a season, Mike Vrabel. Current leader for tackles for lost yards in a career, Mike Vrabel. Current leader for quarterback sacks. Not quarterback sacks in a season. Quarterback sacks in a career, Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel had 36 sacks. 36 sacks. Jason Simmons was second at 27.5. I don't remember exactly where Chase Young ended up. He was probably right around 28, 29. But, Chase Young had a great career, and it was only 3 years, and Vrabel did play 4. But 36 sacks. That's just very hard to discount to me. Just the level of production over that many years. I think you could probably put him on the side opposite Chase Young. But yeah, Nick Bosa played that full 2018 season, I think that 2018 season looks very different for Ohio State. And at that point, I probably have Nick Bosa ahead of Mike Vrabel as well. But yeah, Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa, like there's a bunch of people that you could put on this list. But yeah, I'll stick with Mike Vrabel.
Yeah, I imagine somebody yelling at you for choosing one of those 3 guys as number 2. You're like, what? You're an idiot. You're choosing Joey Bosa. It's like, well, maybe go watch him and see what kind of player he was. And then if that still upsets you, maybe you just like to be upset. Tom, let's go to we'll start. I don't know. Did you go with a defense with like a 3 tech and a nose tackle, or just like a pair of defensive tackles?
I just went with a pair of defensive tackles.
Okay, that's fine. Number 1 for me, and I'll start here, is Big Daddy.
Yep.
When you talk about the disruption of Chase Young, and nobody's ever brought that level, the first player that comes to my mind on a defensive line is Big Daddy, because Dan Wilkinson. The guy was a monster in, I don't even know what year was that, 93?
Yes.
Is his one major year where it was just fun to watch. That was one of my first real Buckeye memories, even though I can go back a few years earlier than that. But he was one of the first superstars on that defensive line where He dominated things. He was fast at over 300 pounds. He just get up, the burst, the quickness. He was the perfect weapon inside, and that's why he was the number one pick overall. And I know he gets crapped on because maybe that didn't work out, but he played forever and he was a nose tackle. So you're not exactly supposed to be this pass rushing machine at the next level, but he was awesome. He was disruptive. And I remember that 93 Washington game where I believe it was just him and DeMarco Farr, the Washington's version of Big Daddy, and they were just trading disruptive penetration into the backfield. So for me, number one, it's Big Daddy Tom. I believe you agree.
Yeah, I think if you are the number one overall draft pick as a interior defensive lineman, like, yep, that should give you an indication how that person was viewed at the time. And yeah, he was one of those people who, if you're a little younger, you might remember Ndamukong Suh being that kind of player, just completely blowing up everything on the inside of the defensive line when he was at Nebraska. Same thing. Yeah, I think that is the easy one here. The other guy I have on the inside, a little older, Jim Stillwagon. He was a two-time All-American. He was part of that 1968 to 1970 group of super softs. And yeah, he was another guy who is, obviously well before my time, but someone who everyone who saw him play back then always has him on these lists. And he was one of the key defensive players on one of the greatest Ohio State football teams, 3-year span teams in this history of the program. So yeah, I'll put him as my second defensive tackle.
Won the Outland and the Lombardi in 1970, which is a pretty good sweep. So yeah, I like that. Let's go to linebacker, where here's what I'd like to do. Let's go with a middle linebacker and then two other linebackers. We don't necessarily need to go Will, Sam, because there have been some crazy linebacker lineups. So go ahead, you go first, Tom, and then we'll go from there. Give me a middle linebacker.
I will. Well, I guess if I'm going to go with a middle linebacker, I'll go with Randy Gratishaw, two-time All-American, late 70s. He was, he's one of those people that, again, this is a little before my time, but everyone who remembers the 70s at Ohio State talks about him as the guy. He was just the guy. And, for a school that has as many great linebackers as it has in its history, I think he's got to be on there somewhere. Yeah.
If I ask you, okay, who's your first number one linebacker, who would that be then? It's Chris Spielman, right?
Yeah. I mean, I have three linebackers here. None of them are Andy Katzenmoyer, which probably might surprise people because Andy Katzenmoyer certainly could be on here as well. But yeah, Chris Spielman, I mean, two-time All-American. He's, he's another person where you look at the records and it's like, wait, that number can't be right. Mm-hmm. Total, I'm just going to look it up. Tackles in a game, he had 29 against Michigan in 1986. Seems good. That seems like a lot of tackles. So yeah, he's someone who has to be on your list and pretty high on your list.
Yeah, we probably should go with four linebackers like they used to do, back in the day. But Gratishaw and Spielman, for me, I think AJ Hawk and Ryan Shazier are as good as any linebackers I've seen at Ohio State. And I guess if I had to choose one of those guys, and the thing is, it's like there's still Tom Cousineau and there's tons of other Marcus Merrick, of the guys from the 70s that could just as easily be on this list, 200 tackles in a season and all kinds of crazy numbers. I don't know if, do we go all old school? Because I agree with Gratishaw, I agree with Spielman, but for me, I think Ryan Shazier deserves some consideration because that dude was in the backfield. He's the prototype, and he played early. He was disruptive early, could do all sorts of different things. So I don't know that I've seen a better linebacker than him with my own eyes at Ohio State. And Andy Katzenmoyer was awesome as a freshman. I don't think he reproduced those numbers, but you'll have that when you lose as much talent, maybe defensively, as the Buckeyes did in the years after that. But I'm going Shazier with my third, Tom. What are you doing?
Well, what's amazing is I'm not going to say this guy's name as my third person. You didn't list him, but there was also a 3-time All-American consensus linebacker who played for Ohio State this century, James Laurinitis. Like he's you really want to have 6 players, at least 6 or 7 linebackers on this team, because like there's positions where it's like there's a drop off after the top 2, after the top 3. Like linebacker, I kind of want to put a 2 deep out there because if you are a 3-time All-American, you should absolutely be on this team. But to me, I think you have to look at Tom Cousineau because again, this is a little before my time. But I'm just going to read down the single game tackles record. Tied for first with 29 against Penn State in 1978. Third with 28 against SMU in 1978. Sixth with 23 against Baylor in 1978. Sixth with 23 against Indiana in 1978. Eighth with 22 against Michigan in 1976. 11th with 21 against Michigan in 1978. Like that's absurd. 211 tackles in 1978. Yeah. School record for tackles in a season. He was a 2-time All-American, number 1 overall draft pick for the Buffalo Bills in the NFL draft. I mean, that's a lot. And I know the game has changed, and so middle linebackers are not picking up the kind of tackle numbers they did in the late 70s. But, man, that's a lot of data that's pretty hard to ignore, just between the tackle numbers and the fact that he was viewed as the number 1 overall draft pick in the NFL. I mean, that's a lot. But, yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, Shazier, Hawk, Laurinitis, like any of those guys, Katzenmoyer, any of those guys you could put on here and I would not throw a big fit. Marcus Merrick too. Marcus Merrick was another guy in those late 70s, early 80s. He was another guy who had crazy tackles. He is the school leader, 572 tackles all time, three more than Tom Cousineau. He was 1979 to 82, so the early Earl Bruce years. It's real hard to leave any of those guys off here. So I say we just put 7 linebackers on our team and just, if you got a problem with it, take it up with James Laurinitis, man. I don't know what to tell you.
We can run a 4-7 because if we've got Chase Young and Mike Vrabel and Big Daddy and whomever else, we don't have to worry about a secondary. We'll be fine. And when you're talking about the Buckus Award, Andy Katzenmoyer and James Laurinitis are the only Ohio State Buckeyes to win it. So Spielman never won it. Marcus Merrick, Randy Gratishaw. Sure, the award started in 1985. But, Tom, the old guys never won that award.
It's true. It's true. Never once appeared on Sports Center either, Marcus Merrick. It's really it's a dark mark against him.
You're right. And that's why he's probably number 8 on our, top 7 list. Let's go to corners, which I have an issue with. I have trouble with this one. First of all, Jack Tatum is listed as an All-American corner at Ohio State,
but he wasn't.
The way the players are listed back then through Ohio State's website and wherever, it's like it's almost like a different game being played back then, and so we'll go ahead and leave him with the safeties. But the difficult part for me is if we're just picking one corner, that was hard enough. But now you're opening up to, okay, now you can pick 2. And I think that makes it maybe there's so many other players that you can now bring into the discussion. But for me, Tom, and here's where I have a contradiction, because I think Antoine Winfield might be the best defensive player I've seen in Ohio State history with my eyes. But I think Sean Springs is the best overall corner that I've seen at Ohio State with my own eyes, because he was a lockdown guy. He made ridiculous catches, was also an outstanding returner. But the fact that he was a guy who would intercept the ball, that takes him a little bit over Antoine Winfield, in my opinion, in terms of the overall corner ability. Springs was a very good tackler as well. Now, Antoine Winfield is the greatest tackler in the history of football. We all agree with that. So I feel like if I'm just going with the greatest of all time corner at Ohio State, the place that has produced I believe it's 87 first-round picks at corner. For me, it begins with Sean Springs. He is the guy. He is the perfect corner to me. He's the guy I compare everybody else to. Am I contradicting myself by what I'm saying here, Tom, that Antoine Winfield is the best defensive player, but Sean Springs is the best corner?
I think that's reasonable. I had 4 names down here for corner as I was trying to narrow things down, and those names were Sean Springs, Antoine Winfield, Malcolm Jenkins, and Jeff Okuda. I think Jeff Okuda is this is something that if you've watched Ohio State last year, you're probably, the older guys have the advantage of sort of having the hazy memories, and all you remember is the great plays, and they sort of benefit from that. But man, Jeff Okuda was so good last year. Jeff Okuda was just absolutely. Anytime, people did not throw his direction very often, but I remember turning to you in the press box a couple times going, wow, that was really stupid. Why did they throw it in? Did you guys not watch film this week? Like, he's good, right? Don't do that. I think he's on that. He's in that top 4 group to me. But yeah, I ended up with Sean Springs as my number 1 and Antoine Winfield number 2. And then, you've got Winfield won the Thorpe Award. Malcolm Jenkins won the Thorpe Award. So it's pretty, you can't really go wrong with any of those guys, but Sean Springs, the number 3 overall pick in 1997, I think, again, you kind of have to take some of that data in as well, that is where he was perceived to be at the end of his career. And I think that's, and, he went on to have an extremely good NFL career as well. Long, very productive NFL career. So, yeah, I would go with Sean Springs there, but, I know better than to take Antoine Winfield's name in vain around you, so he's probably my number 2 there.
Let me see if I can interest you in this lineup. Let's go with the 3-man corner rotation that Kerry Combs loves of Sean Springs, Malcolm Jenkins, and Jeff Okuda. And I'm going to put Antoine Winfield as the slot corner. How does that defense do for you, Tom? Because as I'm imagining Antoine Winfield playing that slot and doing all of the things that entails, he seems like the perfect guy for that role.
I think the one place you may run into issues is running the 3-corner back rotation with the slot corner, the 4 defensive linemen, and the 7 linebackers. You're going to get a lot of illegal participation penalties. Other than that, it seems like a pretty attractive option. I don't think you're getting scored on a lot, but you may give up a whole bunch of penalty yards with that.
Well, here's the thing. If I have Antoine Winfield in the slot, I don't need linebackers. So you can throw a couple more defensive linemen on the field. It won't matter. I've got Antoine Winfield. I don't need anybody else.
And you know what? That's fair. I would be pretty comfortable running those 7 linebackers out there without a whole lot of defensive backs. I'd be pretty comfortable running those 4 defensive backs out there without a whole bunch of linebackers. I think no matter which group there is there, I feel like you're probably putting up some shutouts during the course of the season.
Absolutely, unless they're playing Phillip Rivers in 2004 or 2003, which was the greatest opponent performance perhaps of all time against the Buckeyes, or certainly one of them. Tom, let's move to safety, where if you have to go with one guy, I want to hear this because we know who one of them is going to be. Is the other a 3-time All-American and arguably the greatest safety of all time at Ohio State as well?
And a key contributor to a national championship winning Ohio State team that did not have a lot of offense to lean on. Yes, he is. That would be one Mike Doss. He is I think he's got to be there. I mean, if you're a 3-time All-American, you've got to be in this conversation in somewhere. And he was someone who was, you can't think of very many bad Mike Doss plays if you think back to that whole period. Like, it was just, he was consistently in the right place at the right time, made some absolutely enormous plays for that team. I mean, the interception at the beginning of the Fiesta Bowl against Miami was just an absolute game-changing play right off the bat. And I think that's, he is someone who, he had big plays against Michigan, interception returns against Michigan. Like, he's someone who was known as a big hitter, but was just a great all-around player. Really, really big time, like big moment player. Yeah, I think you've got to have Mike Doss there.
one of my first experiences with HTML was creating a Mike Doss Heisman page. I believe it was in 2000, because like as a true freshman in 99, you saw what he could do, and he was special. And then each year I just kept expecting him to win the Biletnikoff because he was outrageous. He was a big hitter. He was also a guy who made plays on the ball and it would intercept things. And as you said, Tom, 3-time All-American, impossible to ignore. So for me, he's still not on the top of my list, because for me, the greatest safety of all time at Ohio State is Malik Hooker. And I don't care if it was one season. That season is like Terry Glenn's season, but nobody else had comparable seasons. You know how other receivers had comparable seasons to Terry Glenn? Like, nobody has really done what Malik Hooker did. And sure, Mike Doss had more tackles and Jack Tatum was Jack Tatum, but Malik Hooker, like 7 interceptions, returned 3 of them for touchdowns, probably should have had a 4th, and maybe even 5 if he comes up with one against Clemson, which is really close. It's impossible for me to ignore just how good he was in 2016. It was ridiculous. It was as good as any individual performance of any Buckeye, I think, ever. And so it just sticks out to me so much that for me, if I'm taking a safety, it's him. The fact that we can have a free safety and a strong safety, now I'm happy because I've got Malik Hooker playing deep. I've got Mike Doss playing strong, and I'm good.
Yeah, I am 100% on board with Malik Hooker being on that list. I had Jack Tatum and Mike Doss, but Malik Hooker is, that's like 1A, 1B, and 1C, and they're kind of different players. Tatum not only was one of the greatest safeties, he also had one of the greatest nicknames, the Assassin. Like, if you are a big hitting safety and people are calling you the Assassin, like, yep, you're probably doing just fine at what you're supposed to do. That's exactly what you want to be doing. And was, again, just like Jim Stillwagon, one of the crucial pieces on one of the most dominating Ohio State teams over a 3-year span in school history. So yeah, I'm on board with Malik Hooker. If we are going free safety, strong safety, I'll flip a coin between Jack Tatum and Mike Doss, and then put Malik Hooker in the free spot.
That is a good name for a safety. I think a bad name would be like the Concierge, or I don't know, like
Toast.
Toast. So yeah, there are good nicknames. There are bad nicknames. If you can give me a nickel package, and again, we'll rotate these corners, but with Antoine Winfield in the slot as the nickel, and then Mike Doss and Malik Hooker playing like a 2 deep behind him, that to me, I should go create that team on Madden right now and just have a field day, because as you look through all of these players, and especially in the secondary, and we went through all of these linebackers, but we didn't even talk about guys like Denzel Ward, who was so good, and Nate Clements, who gets a bad rap because of the ball hitting him, and maybe because of the Ron Johnson game against Minnesota. The number of corners at Ohio State that would be deserving on any other team, but because they are at Ohio State, we don't even mention them. It's pretty ridiculous. So I'm pretty good with this 5. I could go with a 4-2-5. I just don't know who the 2 linebackers would be. And that's a discussion that might cause an argument again. So we don't want to do that. Tom, you got anything else? Oh, punter.
Punter, come on. B1G, come on.
Yes, go. Give me what you got, and I'll agree or disagree.
There's only one 3-time All-American punter in Ohio State history, so congratulations, Tom Slaney. You win.
Yeah, number 2.
Yeah. There have been some great ones this century, but yeah, he's pretty clearly number 1 to me.
Yeah, and you have to go with that. But there have been some really good ones. I think Andy Groom still got robbed of the Ray guy, and it seems pretty silly to be upset about that nearly 20 years later, especially about a punter award. But he should have won it in 2002. I think that B.J. Sander was great in 2003, and he won the award, but he wasn't as good as Andy Groom. Cam Johnston was great all 4 years. Drew Chrisman has been really, really good. Took a step back a little bit last year. I expect he'll be fine this year once he gets into his groove. But yeah, it's Skladany. What about long snappers, Tom? For me, it's Liam McCullough, the only perfect Ohio State Buckeye of all time, as I've said on this show before. 4 years, you never had to hear his name, never a bad snap on a punt or a kick, was perfect. And if there's a Mount Rushmore of long snappers, it would just be one guy.
Not only was he perfect on long snaps, he also was the guy who was downfield downing punts at the 1 yard line, like with stunning frequency. He was the first guy down the field. Like it was either, Terry McLaurin or someone on the outside, or it was Liam McCullough getting down there and downing the punt at the 1. So yeah, I would have no issue with Liam McCullough being named the greatest long snapper in Ohio State history.
And the greatest arrival day Buckeye of all time as well.
Yeah, you'll get no argument there. Yeah.
Wearing his shirts of himself, and that's all we ask. And then the great thing, Johnny Dixon a couple years ago wearing the previous year's Liam McCullough shirt. So shout out to both of those guys for just embracing the fun that is college football, which again, people, it is fun. So Tom, you got anything else before we wrap it up? Because I think we did a pretty good job. Didn't agree on everything, but that's not our fault. That's Ohio State's fault for having too many good defensive players.
Yeah, that's on you, Ohio State. Recruit fewer good Ohio State football players, and this podcast will be a much more harmonious place.
Do worse, Ohio State. All right. So I think that'll wrap it up. We want to thank you, as always, for listening to the show. Go ahead and rate and review us. Make sure you're checking out the rest of the shows on the Buckeye Scoop Radio Network, and there are quite a few, and there's different tastes for everybody, different topics, recruiting, Vegas, stories of recruiting, and just all good old-fashioned Ohio State football talk in many different forms and fashions. So give them all a listen. Make sure to check out BuckeyeScoop.com. Sign up for the premium features. I promise you won't be disappointed. And we will talk to you guys later.